The beginning, a fateful autumn day. It still feels like yesterday, though it was 5 years ago, that my life subtly, then suddenly, rerouted itself on an ordinary autumn afternoon. The air was just starting to bite, the kind of chill that chases you in from the porch and urges you to brew some tea. I remember the streets of my town, Franklin, Illinois, covered in thick, crunchy layers of fallen leaves. I always loved watching the neighborhood boys rake those leaves into lopsided piles, only to leap into them with wild laughter as their mothers pretended not to mind the mess afterward. On that particular day, I found myself sitting on the creaky steps of my porch, clutching a mug of too strong coffee, trying to piece together a version of my life that still made sense. My name is Rebecca Miles. I was already 36 by then, but that morning I felt much older, wearier, like every disappointment and mistake was etched onto my bones. The trees, with their spectacular dying colors, reminded me that even endings could be beautiful, though I certainly didn't feel beautiful. Just lost, hovering somewhere between heartbreak and new hope, like the leaves not yet touching the ground. The phone call came as I watched the neighbor's golden retriever chase after a squirrel. A familiar number flashing, an unfamiliar feeling rising in my chest. It was this call, a voice from my past, cracking the numbness, igniting a chain of events I never could have foreseen, not even in my wildest, loneliest daydreams. If someone had told me that day, I'd soon step into a life I had only seen from afar, one where I'd become a stepmother, and even stranger, a reluctant teacher of forgiveness, I would have laughed them off the porch. But life, it seems, is most determined to surprise when we are least prepared. That autumn day, with its sharp air and swirling orange leaves, was the day my new, unlikely story began. My first family and the breaking point. I used to believe in permanence. I grew up imagining that if you worked hard, loved well, and followed all the invisible rules, life would reward you with a calm, steady happiness. So marrying Matt James felt at the time not just like the right choice, but the inevitable one. Matt was charming in a low-key way, a high school baseball star turned insurance agent, the kind of man who called his mother every Sunday morning. We moved into a modest, sunlit house on Birch Lane, painted the kitchen together, held barbecues every summer, and we tried so hard to build the kind of life we'd both admired in our parents. The unraveling started slow. Matt got swept into a real estate deal by an old college friend. Something about vacation rentals, sure to double our savings in a year. I admit, I had doubts, but marriage is about trust, right? Only, the trust was misplaced. Within months, the deal soured, money evaporated, and every stress line doubled overnight. Suddenly, our conversations were stiff and clipped, the laughter dried up. I'd come home late from my job as a library assistant and find Matt hunched over unpaid bills, his jaw tight, accusations balancing unspoken on the tip of his tongue. But the real hurt didn't come from Matt. It came from his family. The Jameses were a tightly knit clan, the sort with matching sweaters and a family group chat. When Matt lost the money, his parents and sisters closed ranks, looking for someone to blame. I could feel the tide turn the moment Matt's mother called to check in. Her voice sugary but sharp, whispers and sideways glances at Thanksgiving, invitations that stopped coming. Suddenly, I was the outsider, the woman who let their golden boy lose everything. I tried to explain, to reason, to plead, but it was like shouting against the wind. Their frostiness crept into our home, settling in the cracks. Eventually, Matt began to echo their sentiments.
And yes, the
Maybe it
scar on
really
the
was
left cheek
easier
is
to blame
accurate.
me
That looks
than
just
face
like
his
him.
own pain. The end, when it finally came, was oddly quiet. Matt left on a damp Thursday morning, suitcase in hand, and not a word more than, "I'll send for the rest later." The silence he left behind was loud as thunder. I found myself alone in that too-bright kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of plans that would never be realized. In the months that followed, I felt myself shrinking. Birthday cards sat unsent, friendships thinned, and self-doubt grew roots. There was a grief I hadn't known, of not just losing a husband, but the family I'd tried so hard to be a part of. But even as I mourned, something fragile and stubborn inside of me refused to break entirely. Maybe it was anger, maybe pride, maybe hope. I can't say for sure. What I do know is that it was the beginning of another chapter, though I had no way of knowing what, or who, was waiting just down the street. A new beginning next door. The months after Tyler walked out were a blur of packing tape and cardboard boxes. I found a rental 2 streets over, a squat, sturdy craftsman with peeling green paint, less grand, but with a wide porch that caught the morning sun. Unloading what was left of my life, I met my new neighbor before I'd even finished dragging my mattress inside. That was Michael Thompson. Mike, to anyone inside a 3-mile radius. A man who wore grief as openly as his football team sweatshirts. I'd heard whispers from the realtor. Wealthy, recently widowed, 2 kids, one in college, one still home. Ran his own lumber company. It was his eyes that told the real story. Kind, a bit lost, like a man who'd misplaced his map. When he appeared on my porch with his old dog and a bottle of welcome wine on my first Sunday morning, it felt like the universe nudging me. Not quite a rescue, but maybe a rescue attempt. We started with simple neighbor talk. Weather. The stray cat that slept on my stoop. The best pizza spot in town. But soon, Michael and I fell into a kind of hesitant camaraderie that filled up the silence inside both our houses. I'd see him out in the yard at dusk, hands deep in flower beds, humming old country songs. Sometimes, on days when loneliness threatened to swallow me, I'd walk over after dinner with extra peach cobbler. Our conversation shifted, gently, like the season. Books we loved, fears we'd tucked away, the shape of loss. I told him about the mess my marriage had become. He shared confessions about missing his wife, about trying to hold on for his daughter, Samantha. I never saw love coming. There wasn't a click, just a quiet, steady unfolding. He'd fix my leaky faucet. I'd help repaint his kitchen. Sometimes we'd take long evening walks with his dog, sharing old wounds, until the stars pressed us back inside. I worried what people would say. How fast was too fast to care again? But the world didn't stop, and grief didn't vanish. It just softened. Under Michael's gentle steadiness, the world became a little wider. Even his home, same layout as mine, but fuller, noisier, with the scent of cinnamon toast and dog hair, started to feel less like a place of old memories and more like a possibility. Then there was Samantha, his daughter, 15, whip-smart, but walled off. She watched me with cool, wary eyes the first time I came for Sunday chili. I remembered the pain of being unwelcome, so I moved carefully. Small talk, gentle offers to help with homework. But she barely acknowledged me. I learned from Michael that Sam had adored her mother and saw me, at best, as an interloper. I respected the distance. Some nights, I heard her laughter through the thin walls. Felt like I was listening to a story I wasn't allowed to join. Still, Michael and I kept building. In time, the town started talking, mostly in whispers at church or the grocery store. I let them talk. Inside our little world, I found a companion, a partner who understood what loss did to people, and who believed, tentatively, that we might build again. Our courtship wasn't fireworks, but rather coffee, shared on cold mornings, the slow stitching of two lives that had been torn and patched full of holes. I never imagined a second act that began with heartbreak and ended in someone else's kitchen, teaching a sullen girl to bake or laughing at the dog's desperate hunt for squirrels. But that's what it was, a new beginning, unexpected as autumn snow, delicate as the first green shoot poking through the frost. And although I didn't realize it, not consciously, it was also the setup to my greatest challenge yet. Learning what it truly means to be family, with someone not by blood, but by the sheer, stubborn effort of heart. Meeting again the child who once bullied me. Sometimes the past finds you in the most unexpected places. Your own living room, in my case, on an otherwise forgettable Saturday morning. Jack was prepping for another long day, managing construction bids, when the front door swung open and in strode Megan Foster, home from college on a surprise visit. She'd changed a lot since high school. Her posture was more grown, her hair now streaked artfully with ambitious color, but the sharp spark in her blue eyes was instantly recognizable. Megan was the sort of teenager who, years ago, had taken perverse joy in lording over the quieter, more awkward kids like me at Maple Bean Cafe, flinging barbed comments with a sugar-sweet smile, always quick with a comeback or an eye roll. I remembered all too well the sting of her laughter when I'd spilled hot chocolate on my shoes or mixed up a coffee order. She'd been a ringleader, a subtle, clever bully whose words stuck long after the bell rang. Now, she was taller, more poised, her smile a bit guarded. But when our eyes met that day across Jack's living room, a flicker of memory passed between us. Mine heavy with old embarrassment, hers laced with the faintest shade of unease. Jack, ever the peacekeeper, ushered in a clumsy kind of normalcy, telling Megan I'd be joining dinner and steering the conversation toward her classes, her friends, her plans. For the first hour, I tried to be invisible. I busied myself with chopping onions, avoiding any direct conversation. But in a house that size, awkwardness lingers. It was after dinner, as twilight crept in through the windows, that Megan finally cornered me near the stack of dishes. "I guess it's weird, right?" she asked, her tone brittle, not quite apologetic. "You hear, my dad, everything." I could have brushed her off, chosen the safe road of polite small talk. But I remembered too well the helpless anger of being 16, powerless against rumor and hierarchy. Instead, I met her eyes and nodded. It is weird, but sometimes weird turns out better than what we planned. There was a long pause, one that stretched until I wondered if I'd ruined any chance we had for peace. Then, Megan leaned in a fraction and said, softer, "I used to be kind of horrible. I was going through a lot. Doesn't mean it was okay." For the first time, I saw not the sharp-tongued bully, but a young woman struggling under her own burdens. Grief, confusion, and whatever jagged edge came from losing a mother so young. The next weeks unfurled tentatively, Megan treating me with the courteous wariness reserved for strangers she didn't trust, and me working to shed old resentment while forging small connections. We cooked together, with her making sly comments about my uneven pasta, and me showing her how to glaze carrots the way my grandmother did. We argued too, sometimes about music, sometimes about boundaries, real, honest clashes, and afterward, careful, awkward apologies. The past was a presence between us, yes, but each day carved a bit more distance from those memories. There were moments, unexpected and fleeting, when Megan would share something, an exam she aced, an ex-boyfriend's drama, and I'd catch a glimpse of the kid she could have been if life had been gentler. I wouldn't say we became friends quickly. It was more like a gradual reckoning. Two people, both hurt and defensive, fumbling their way toward respect. There are still days when I question whether I'm doing enough, whether forgiveness is truly possible. But as autumn deepened, as Ashford's trees blazed gold and crimson, I realized that what bound us, it wasn't just Jack, or loss, or the accidental geography of blended families. It was the stubborn hope that people can change their story. And in that quiet house on Sycamore Street, with Megan rolling her eyes at my jokes and making fun of my playlists, I learned a new kind of bravery. The kind that lets old wounds heal in the open before the eyes of someone who once knew you at your worst and might, someday, see you at your best, becoming an unexpected stepmother. Nothing in my early years could have prepared me for the strange, bittersweet soup of emotions I would taste as an unexpected stepmother. Before I stumbled into this role, I thought the word carried a kind of fairy tale villain vibe. Stepmothers were strict, cold, or at best awkward fillers for the mother-shaped holes in family stories. It turns out, reality has much trickier layers, and real children don't fall into neat fairy tale stereotypes. If only life came with the clarity of storybooks, I might have felt a little less lost that first year with Ellie. Ellie came barreling into my world like a summer thunderstorm, loud, impossible to ignore, and never quite where I expected her to be. She was 12 when we first tried to blend our odd patchwork of a family. Michael and I had tiptoed toward marriage out of respect for her still raw grief, hesitating over every public display of affection, every joint family event. I remember standing in my tiny kitchen, nervously slicing apples for a pie, the first night Ellie stayed over at my house. She'd barely spoken to me for weeks, but that afternoon, I heard the front door slam and footsteps stomp straight to the heart of the house. She tracked mud everywhere, over my clean floor, my new rug, my nerves. I tried hard to greet her like a friend. Want some apple? I offered, my voice brittle with hope. Ellie shot me a look of such practiced disdain that I nearly dropped the paring knife. "You're not my mom," she said. The words steely and direct. She said it again, louder, when Michael wandered in, trying for a bridge builder's cheer in his tone. "I don't want this." Michael looked at me, helpless, guilt washing across his face. I wanted to reassure him and her and myself that it would all be okay, that time healed, that love was enough. But neither of us really believed it. Not then. I spent much of those first months trying to convince myself I was helping, failing again and again in my attempts to bond. Each day was a fresh reminder that love, in blended families, rarely arrives on time, and grace must be rationed and earned. The early obstacles. In most ways, Ellie was still a child, one who missed the steady comfort of her mom. But she wore sarcasm and rules, breaking like armor. She would hide snacks under her bed, ignore my requests to help set the table, and roll her eyes with such epic force I half expected her to hurt herself. Some days, I'd open her bedroom door to find her sprawled on the floor with half her schoolwork scattered, headphones jammed over her ears, mind and world firmly shut away. I could have chosen to retreat, to keep my distance, and keep the peace. But something, maybe pride, maybe just stubborn empathy, kept pulling me back. I tried every gentle approach. Movie nights, library visits, letting her pick dinner on Saturdays. But if I was friendly, she was frosty. If I set a boundary, she'd press against it. "You're not my real parent," was her constant refrain. One November night, we fought over curfew. I tried to talk, she shouted, and the whole house rattled with our anger. That night, she cried. I heard her muffled sobs through the wall after slamming her door, and something inside me cracked. I remembered being 12, how the world so often felt like it was closing in, and how powerless I'd felt with my own parents' silences. The next morning, I knocked on her door with trembling hands. She didn't answer, but I left a note. If you want to talk, I'm here. If you want to yell at me, I'm here for that too. I wish I could say this single gesture thawed the ice. It did not, but it planted something. A tiny, indignant seed of respect. Over time, our patterns started to shift. She'd still test me, but sometimes she'd pause just long enough to listen, navigating the role. Lessons in Humility, being Ellie's stepmom, was a crash course in humility. Friends would ask, "How's your new family?" As if happiness were simply a matter of logistics. Move in, make dinner, cue a montage of laughter. Instead, our daily soundtrack was one of slammed doors, awkward silences, and Michael's gentle, frustrated sighs as he played referee. I started keeping a journal, mostly so I could vent my confusion onto the page instead of at the people I loved. I wrote about little moments, finding Ellie's socks scattered in the hallway, the way she used humor like a shield, the time she begrudgingly brought me a Band-Aid when I nicked my hand cooking. I chronicled my failures and tiny victories, an afternoon helping her with science homework that didn't end in an argument, her grudging, muttered, "Thanks," when I stood up for her at a parent-teacher meeting. It was exhausting work, loving someone who didn't want to be loved by you. I often questioned myself. Was I doing too much or not enough? Should I lean in or pull back? I asked Michael late one night, "Do you think she'll ever want me here?" His answer was honest, beautiful, and heavy. "I don't know," he said, "but I do know that she needs someone who's not going to give up on her, even when she's trying her hardest to make you want to." Over months, I learned to see Ellie not just as a stepdaughter, but as a person in her own right, complicated, messy, and fiercely brave. I stopped trying to win her over with gifts or forced cheer. Instead, I tried to show up again and again, even when the only acknowledgement I received was begrudging eye contact over the dinner table. I became a fixture, reliable but not overbearing, a quiet but steady presence in the tumult of her life. The smallest shifts change in our blended household came in slivers, so tiny they were barely noticeable day to day. Still, every so often, a new possibility would shimmer between us. One spring evening, I found myself outside with Ellie, repotting flowers for the porch. She didn't want my help at first, but when my clumsy hands snapped a fragile stem, she snorted with laughter. "You're hopeless," she said. "Here, let me do it." For the first time, she offered to teach me, her fingers surprisingly gentle as she pressed dirt around the roots. I watched her, thinking how fast she was growing up, and wondered if she would remember any of these moments when she was older. Afterward, inside, she lingered with me, asking, almost shyly, if I'd help her with an art project for school. It was nothing big, just gluing together pieces of colorboard, yet it felt like scaling a mountain together. I also realized there was a kind of grief in being a stepmother, not just the loss of the fantasy, of instant love and effortless acceptance, but the subtler grief of not being able to claim her milestones as my own, of living in the shadow of a woman she missed every day. I learned to respect Ellie's memories, to ask about her mom, and listen, without jealousy, to her stories. Sometimes she'd correct the details, roll her eyes at my questions, But I tried, as best I could, to show her that her history was safe with me. In the darkest moments, when Ellie lashed out or withdrew, I repeated to myself a mantra: breathe, show up, repeat. Some days, it felt like the bravest thing I could do was simply not to walk away. Family. Reimagine Michael and I continued to anchor our home with little rituals: pizza on Fridays, Sunday hikes with the dog. But we also learned to flex, to build new traditions that included and respected Ellie's rhythms. We let her invite friends to sleep over. We let her paint an accent wall turquoise, even though it clashed with everything else. I was surprised to find myself growing attached to her defiant spirit, her bright flashes of humor and curiosity. She was not an extension of me. She was wholly her own, and I learned to love that about her. There were setbacks, too. After an especially tough fight one autumn over boundaries and responsibilities, I ended up crying alone in the bathroom, exhausted by the relentless effort. Later, that night, Ellie slid a note under the door. It read, in crooked block letters, "Sorry I yelled, it's just hard." That simple message felt like a lifeline. It was not forgiveness, not quite acceptance, but a crack in the wall. I kept the note, tucking it in my journal as a reminder that progress, no matter how slow, was still progress. Slowly, our blended family began to find its shape. Ellie started to come out of her room more. She talked, sometimes even joked, at dinner. She sulked less and laughed more. I treasured those moments, knowing how hard-won they were. As the months passed, I realized that my role as Ellie's stepmom was less about being a replacement and more about being a steady presence, to witness her struggles without rushing in to fix them, to celebrate her growth even when it felt bittersweet, to remain even when loving her meant weathering tempests. I learned that, for all the stories about wicked stepmothers or perfect blended families, the truth is usually somewhere in between, messy, open-ended, and all the more beautiful for it. Finding grace in unlikely places, we found odd grace in the imperfections. There were afternoons when Ellie and I would silently share space at the kitchen table, her with her homework, me with a book. Sometimes, I'd catch her sneaking glances at me, as if trying to puzzle out whether I was truly here to stay. She never said it, at least not in words, but I could sense the gradual shift, the melting of that initial, icy distrust. Holidays were particularly tricky. The first Thanksgiving, Ellie refused to eat my stuffing and sat sullenly in front of her phone. I wanted to cry. By the next year, though, she was the one reminding me to make the cranberry sauce like last time. Little things, shared jokes, inside references, accumulated, weaving us together. One winter night, as Michael worked late, Ellie and I found ourselves watching a movie together. Halfway through, she reached for my hand. Not quite a hug, not quite nothing, but a bridge built out of mutual, tentative trust. I squeezed back, trying to telegraph all the things I didn't know how to say. I am here. I see you. I may never be who you lost, but I will always show up. Looking back over that year, I see dozens of failures and a handful of small, shining victories. I stopped trying to measure my success by Ellie's affection or acceptance. Love, I learned, is measured by showing up, again and again, in ways both grand and invisible. Being a stepmother became something noble, if profoundly ordinary. A daily recommitment, a labor of patience, a letting go of ego, and a quiet, persistent act of hope. In the end, being an unexpected stepmom wasn't the storybook role I'd half feared and half envied. It was richer, more complicated, occasionally heartbreaking, and freckled with moments of unexpected joy. Ellie never fully said, "I love you," but the day I found a note on my pillow in her familiar handwriting, "Thanks for sticking around," was, in its own way, a kind of happy ending. I wasn't her mother, but I was there, and sometimes that was enough. A pivotal, turning point change, in my experience, rarely announces itself with a fanfare. It's more like the quiet shift in daylight, as dawn seeps into a room, softening sharp edges you didn't realize were there. For months, after officially becoming a stepmother to Ellie, I existed in a tightrope act, careful, vigilant, always a little tense, as if one wrong word could shatter the fragile truce we'd managed to construct. But the transformation that would define our relationship snuck up on me, not in a grand, dramatic gesture, but in countless, subtle, complicated moments. The first seeds of true change were sown during the endless winter evenings that seemed to drag on for years after I joined Michael and Ellie's household. The snow would bury our small town in silence. Michael often traveled for work, leaving Ellie and me alone together for entire weekends, a prospect that once would have sent me running for excuses or arranging late-night plans with friends just to avoid awkwardness. But over time, those stretches of shared solitude forced us to meet each other as we were, flawed, wounded, and, though neither of us said it aloud, in desperate need of kindness. The night everything shifted, one evening in January, our power flickered and finally gave up. The heater sputtered off, and the house grew cold so quickly that I could see my breath. As I fumbled through drawers for batteries and candles, I found Ellie curled up on the couch in her puffy teal blanket, eyes glued to her phone, pretending not to notice the world dimming around us. I recognized the look she wore, not fear exactly, but the wary, bracing for disaster kind of anticipation that I knew all too well from childhood. In that moment, I saw not the sullen teen who rolled her eyes at me every morning, but a little girl hoping someone would make the dark less scary. I sat next to her. For a minute, neither of us spoke. I handed her a candle and said, "I always used to pretend power outages were a chance to have an indoor camping adventure. Want to help me hunt for the marshmallows and tell each other a scary story or two?" To my surprise, her lips twitched. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. That night, in the flicker of candlelight, we improvised shadow puppets and told stories until the battery died. She laughed at my terrible British accent, and I pretended not to notice that she kept inching closer on the couch. As if drawn by warmth, neither one of us could quite admit we wanted. It was such a small thing, just a night, a moment in the dark. But in the days that followed, the old frostiness seemed to thaw a bit. Ellie left her bedroom door open longer in the evenings. She started correcting my math when I checked the grocery bill, and even let me make her tea, with too much honey. Of course, there was still resistance, still days when we snapped and sulked, but the act of being forced together in literal darkness let both of us glimpse the possibility of choosing each other, not just tolerating. Learning compassion from the young compassion I learned is not a state, but a verb, a practice, made up of 100 tiny, often invisible decisions. With Ellie, it became an intentional effort to ask about her day and truly listen, even when the answers were shrugs or sarcasm. To hold my tongue when my patience ran thin, and remember that her pain came long before I entered the picture. Sometimes I failed spectacularly. There were days when my own insecurities boiled over, when, after another stony dinner, I'd retreat to my room and wonder if the gulf between us would ever close. But for every setback, there was some small reassurance. the sticky note she left on my desk, reminding me to pick up cereal she liked. The shy apology after we clashed over curfews. Through Ellie, I was forced to question why I reacted as I did, to examine my own defenses and realize that being the adult didn't make me immune to hurt. One evening, after a tense argument about screen time, Ellie surprised me by blurting out, "You never just yell." My old teachers yelled. They didn't care what I was going through. The comment stung, but it also gave me hope that my efforts, my stubborn refusal to give up on her, were having an effect. "I do care," I told her simply. She nodded, jerky, embarrassed. "Yeah, it's weird, but I know." I started to see her compassion turn outward, too. When her friend Lizzie had a falling out at school, Ellie invited her over, offering my kitchen table as sanctuary. I listened from the hallway as Ellie comforted her, careful and cautious, repeating small phrases I'd muttered on hard nights. "It will pass. Sometimes you just have to let it suck for a while." There, in the reflection of her empathy for someone else, I saw the first evidence of something taking root, finding my own growth. This chapter in my life didn't just reshape Ellie, it transformed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I went into step-parenthood, braced for rejection, nursing old wounds from my own family, convinced that affection must be earned through relentless effort. For the first time, I had to confront the uncomfortable truth that love could not be forced, only given, freely, without any guarantee of return. Living with Ellie required patience I never knew I had. At first, I held on so tightly to the idea of being accepted that every minor slight felt like an indictment. But gradually, as I learned to offer empathy and not expect immediate reciprocation, I noticed my own edges softening. I remembered that people, especially children, are not puzzles to be solved, but mysteries to be respected and witnessed. Ellie wasn't a test or a project. She was a wholly unique human, rough around the edges, but capable of kindness and beauty I hadn't seen before. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, writing in my journal about how each small breakthrough felt like a second adolescence. Awkward, thrilling, sometimes painful. It was humbling, learning that the old, easy answers from self-help books or advice columns didn't always fit the jagged shape of real family struggles. Progress was measured in whispered confidences, in the graceful way we learned to retreat and re-engage, in the willingness to apologize and try again. The power of vulnerability in Weekend. Ellie and I tackled a house project together, repainting an old bookshelf for her room. She insisted on a wild palette of purples and orange, colors I would never have chosen, but I agreed, deciding that autonomy meant more than matching decor. We worked on it all Saturday, laughter and splatters growing alongside my respect for her stubborn vision. Partway through, I made a mistake, bumping the shelf and tipping half a can of paint over my jeans. I cursed, more loudly than I meant to, then braced for the defensive silence I'd so often encountered. Instead, Ellie grinned, covering her mouth to stifle giggles. "It's just paint," she said, echoing a refrain from somewhere deep in my memory. My own mother's words, decades ago when I was the messy one. For that fleeting instant, the line between adult and child evaporated. We were just two people, side by side in our imperfections. It struck me that perhaps this very willingness to show vulnerability, to let her see me frustrated, making mistakes, recovering, was what Ellie needed from me most. She didn't want, or believe in, a perfect mother figure. She needed someone real, someone who could weather emotional messes and keep showing up anyway. Vulnerability became a quiet bond between us. I began to share pieces of my past, too. The messy breakup with Matt, my own feelings of rejection from his family, the way starting over in this new house sometimes made me feel lonely and small. Ellie listened, not always commenting, but nodding. I could tell she understood the ache of being out of place. In return, she began dropping little clues about her own fears, pressure to fit in at school, pangs of missing her mom, anxiety about her grades. These moments were never long, but they were luminous, prying open space for true connection. Family meetings and new rituals. The second spring of my life with Michael and Ellie brought a changing energy to our household. I suggested something I'd read about online: family meetings. At first, both Michael and Ellie groaned, suspecting an agenda of lectures and rule books. But I promised it would be different. Just a standing time every Sunday evening to talk, vent, and yes, sometimes argue, but always with respect. Our first few attempts were rocky. Ellie staked out her space with crossed arms and monosyllabic answers. Michael, eager to please, tried too, hard to mediate. Yet week by week, the ritual stuck. We'd gather around the table, sometimes with snacks, sometimes with pizza, and talk about the week ahead, schedule conflicts, household responsibilities, or whatever happened to be looming. Little by little, surprising currents of honesty loosened the tension. Ellie started requesting more autonomy. Let me plan my own lunches, or can I paint the bathroom? I could see her confidence grow as we entrusted her with decisions. Nothing world-shaking, but signals that she was heard, that her preferences mattered. Michael learned to step back, letting me and Ellie hash out disagreements, even when it made him uneasy. These Sunday evenings became our family's glue, even on weeks when we argued or life felt overwhelming. We made it a rule, never to go to bed without some measure of closure. Sometimes a joke, sometimes a walk, sometimes just a quiet apology. These small rituals made our fractured family feel, if not perfect, at least genuine and resilient. Letting go of the old blueprint. One of the hardest lessons to learn, one I'm still learning, was to let go of the blueprints I carried from my past. How a family was supposed to look. What a real mother-daughter relationship would be. The illusion that love follows a fixed script. There were times when my longing for tidy, postcard-perfect moments threatened to eclipse the untidy beauty of what we were building here. I had to acknowledge my own grief, not just for the ease of my childless life or the fallout from my first marriage, but also the bittersweet realization that I would never be the mother Ellie lost. My role was different, and sometimes all the more important for that very difference. I had to find contentment in being a supporting character in her main story, not the hero. There's grace in admitting that not every need can be met by one person, that healing is communal and collective. As I stepped back from trying to fix every situation and let Michael and Ellie navigate their relationship on their terms, our bonds deepened. When Ellie sought out her cousins or confided in Michael instead of me, I no longer saw it as a slight, but as natural and even healthy. It was a relief, too, to realize I didn't have to be everything to everyone. I just had to be steady, honest, and willing to stay. A crisis reveals our progress. The true test of our new family dynamic came during an unexpected crisis late that summer. Ellie, ever stubborn, had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house and forgotten to check in as promised. When she still hadn't messaged by midnight, panic closed in on me like a vice. Old anxieties about abandonment and responsibility flared. Michael, out of town on business, called every 15 minutes for updates, his worry only fueling mine. Finally, at 2 a.m., Ellie stumbled through the door, rumpled, apologetic, with a face stained by tears. She had lost track of time, her phone battery had died, and the guilt clearly added her more than anything I could say. I braced for a confrontation, but instinctively, I could see that anger would only add shame to her fear. Instead, I put the kettle on and sat with her at the counter in silence. Eventually, I found the words. I was scared because I care. I just need to know you're safe. Next time, let's find a plan that works for both of us.
We're safe now.
Ellie nodded, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. It wasn't about the rules. It was about trust. The crisis itself was less significant than the way we moved through it. Mutual respect, vulnerability, forgiveness. I realized this was the heart of our change. We were beginning to see each other not as threats or obligations, but as people worth loving, even when we mess up. A quiet milestone. That September, as the trees on our street flickered orange and gold, Ellie came home from school carrying the bruises and exhilaration of trying out for the soccer team. Her mother had played soccer, too, one of many legacies I was aware of, but never tried to replace. I found myself, for the first time, able to support her without feeling like I was encroaching on sacred ground. After her first game, she found me in the kitchen, hesitated, then blurted, "Are you coming to the next one?" "I'd love to," I said, careful not to overplay it. She looked relieved, then embarrassed, then mumbled, "Good, 'cause Dad yells too loud and you bring snacks." That mundane, throwaway comment felt enormous, a quiet marker of trust, the affirmation that I was wanted, not just tolerated. When I sat in the stands and cheered, quietly, I saw Ellie's gaze flick toward me every so often. Each small moment, each act of inclusion and invitation accumulated into something that looked an awful lot like family. Healing in both directions. If there's one truth I've learned in this chapter, it's that transformation is rarely one-sided. While I watched Ellie develop compassion and gain trust, I recognized my own growth reflected right back at me. She taught me patience, resilience, how to stand firm, and also let go. She forced me to unlearn old habits, perfectionism, the fear of not being enough, and helped me make peace with ongoing uncertainty. Each of us, flawed and determined, was choosing to try again and again. I began to see my own strength, not as an armor against pain, but as an openness to connection. Ellie learned, in her own time, that love can come from unlikely places and people. Her willingness to meet me halfway was never complete or permanent, but it was enough, and it changed me, deep in my bones. The pivotal turning point of that year was not one single day, but an accretion of moments. Late-night talks, house projects, resolved crises, and the daring vulnerability of trying and failing and trying again. Looking back, I saw how we had both moved from a state of near survival to something closer, to hope, a belief that while our story was never going to be typical, it was uniquely ours. Healing and loving, a family remade. There's a kind of hush in the house these days that's so different from when I first stumbled, trembling, into my role as an unexpected stepmother. The tension that once stuck to our walls has been replaced by a gentler atmosphere, a feeling like a room that's been open to fresh air after too many seasons locked away. Now, as autumn's golden light filters through our kitchen window, I find myself brimming with a kaleidoscope of emotions: relief, gratitude, astonishment, and above all, a tender and hard-won love for this strange, patched-together family of mine. It's funny how healing sneaks up on us. I used to believe Maybe the world taught me to, that healing was some distant finish line you crossed after years of meticulous work and unwavering optimism. But the reality I've learned is far messier, more subtle. It's small choices, repeated into rituals, small kindnesses that stitch up old wounds, and a willingness to keep showing up even when every part of you wants to run. Sometimes, healing is just the sound of laughter echoing down a hallway where, months ago, there was only silence. I remember the first time I noticed the change. It wasn't a grand epiphany or a cinematic moment. It was just a regular Tuesday. I was folding laundry when Ellie barged in, dropped her bag, and, catching me off guard, asked if I could help her study for her history test. Just like that, no eye-rolling, no sarcasm, just the naked needs of a child reaching toward an open door. I fumbled my answer, probably more awkward than parental, but afterward, I sat on the bed, holding one of her sweatshirts, and let myself cry. For the first time, I wasn't crying from exhaustion or heartbreak. This time, it was relief in the joy of being wanted, even in a small, practical way. The work, of course, was never just mine. Michael, my partner, deserves credit for his unwavering warmth and resilience. There were nights when I was too tired or defeated to try again, and he would quietly run interference, suggesting movie marathons, picking up takeout from Ellie's favorite diner, slipping a silly note under my pillow to remind me to laugh. He's never been the conquering hero type. Instead, his love has always looked like constancy. It's hard to describe how much that has mattered. The steadiness of a man who keeps showing up, not just for me, but for our daughter, forging a bridge, while both sides learn to walk across it. The patchwork of second chances. One lesson I've learned is that you can't force belonging, not for yourself and not for anyone else. The harder I pushed to be accepted, the more Ellie recoiled. It was only after I let the stillness settle between us, after I allowed space for her memories, her pain, that we started to build anew. I stopped expecting gratitude or affection and started understanding that some days, just not slamming a door was its own step forward. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to stay present and wait. Our house became a patchwork of new and old traditions, sometimes jagged but sincere. We carved pumpkins, badly, I might add, because Ellie once whispered her mom did that with her. We hosted pancake Sundays, a habit left over from my bachelor years, and marveled as our little family invented new inside jokes, references, and small markers of togetherness. There were roadside picnics, rescue dog birthdays, and quiet evenings spent piecing together jigsaw puzzles when words failed us. I found myself learning as much from Ellie as she ever learned from me. She taught me that grief isn't tidy and doesn't respect schedules. Her anger, which at first seemed so directed at me, slowly revealed itself as mourning for the mother she'd lost and the life she'd believed she could never reclaim. Understanding that made it easier to hold my own disappointments up to the light and let them go, just a bit. We became two people, each nursing invisible hurts, learning what it means to forgive and try again. Perhaps most surprising of all was how I started to forgive myself. For my first marriage's collapse, for the nights I'd been impatient, for all the times I didn't know how to reach out. Healing felt less like triumph and more like a quietly flexible acceptance. I stopped measuring our family by glossy magazine covers, and instead, by the warmth I felt every time I set the table and heard both Michael and Ellie call out that dinner smelled good. I suppose second chances, like patchwork quilts, are always a bit uneven, but they keep you warm all the same. Growth in the tiniest places. If you'd told me on that first miserable autumn after my divorce, that joy would quietly take root again in such unexpected soil, I would have laughed you off my porch. Life insisted otherwise. These days, my hands are always busy, packing lunches, running errands, coaching Ellie through algebra, or hushing the dog when delivery drivers come by. I sometimes catch myself humming as I tackle mundane tasks, a sure sign that contentment is back in the bones of my days. Ellie, too, has grown. I've watched the girl who once broadcast heartbreak with every gesture turn into someone who lets herself be curious again. About friendships, new hobbies, even about us. She's taken up guitar, and on weekends, our house is soundtracked by experimental chords and the occasional, shyly shared song in the kitchen. There are sleepovers and spilled secrets, and more than one late-night drive to pick her up from a friend's house when plans went awry. Each occasion is another opportunity for trust, another thread in our family's new fabric. Michael and I still get things wrong. Parenting a teenager, I imagine, is like trying to read a weather map that changes every 15 minutes. But I've learned to apologize faster, to laugh more often, and to let go of the myth that closeness is ever really permanent. We have learned, all of us together, how to repair after hurting each other, how to say, "I'm sorry," and occasionally, even more healing, "I forgive you." The long road of forgiveness. The idea of forgiveness used to feel to me like something you do for someone else, a noble act directed outward. Now, having lived through my own storms, I see it differently. Forgiveness is permission to move forward, to leave behind stones that serve no purpose but to weigh you down. I forgave Matt years after we parted, realizing that his failings didn't mean I was unlovable or doomed to repeat old mistakes. I forgave Ellie, silently at first. For every slammed door and icy glare, it helped me breathe easier, made it easier to remember that she was, for a long time, just as scared of this new life as I was. But the most profound forgiveness had to come for myself. The countless times I questioned every decision, every boundary set or bent, every missed signal or misunderstood mood. These used to echo in my head at night. Somewhere along the way, as our household's noise softened into laughter and routine, I learned to grant myself grace, too. One evening, after Ellie performed at her first school open mic, she caught me wiping away a tear and, instead of shrugging off my pride, let herself be held for a heartbeat. I knew then, with bone-deep certainty, that the version of myself who had once felt so lost had finally made her way home. That's the gift of forgiveness. It lets joy sneak back in at last, embracing the ordinary miracles. If our journey has taught me anything, it's that the ordinary moments are the real miracles. Watching the seasons cycle in our little town, trees going bare, lemonade stands popping up again in the spring, the hum of Michael's saw in the garage. These tiny rhythms have become our anchor. I cherish when Ellie asks if she can have friends over, or when Michael texts that he's bringing home pie. The smallest invitations often carry the greatest meaning. A shared glance over dinner, a casual question about the school formal, even a text from Ellie asking when I'll be back from errands. Every so often, I still stumble. Old insecurities kick up. Am I doing enough? Do I belong here? But experience has afforded me the wisdom to pause, breathe, and focus on what my new life actually feels like, not just how it appears to others. Our family isn't perfect or easily explained to the outside world, but it is fiercely, lovingly ours. I relish the ways we've learned to weather both disappointment and delight. The grace we extend to each other is hard-won, but it has turned this home
God.
into a
They
refuge.
broke it. I can't
Not
believe
just
he did
from the
that.
storm, but from the chill of loneliness that
Look at him.
lingers
He
after
shows no
loss.
remorse.
Full circle,
We
a
have to send him
happy
away.
ending, not the fairy tale. Kind, recently, Ellie celebrated her 16th birthday. Nostalgia hit me hard as I watched her laughter bounce off the kitchen walls during her party. She let me help string up decorations, choose the music, even bake her favorite cake. As long as I followed her recipe, no improvising allowed. As the guests trickled out that night, she stopped beside me at the sink, drying plates, and whispered, "Thanks for making all this normal. It's good, you know." For a long, suspended second, I saw in her eyes the girl who had once walled herself off, and beside her, the young woman just beginning to trust the future again. Looking back at that moment, I realized it wasn't the grand gestures that mattered, but the thousands of tiny ones.
Us.
Each one a reminder that love,
Resents us.
while sometimes messy and slow, can remake the world one Tuesday at a time. So, this is where my story rests for now. Not at a neat conclusion, but at an ever-renewing beginning. Our family is not an old photograph, frozen in perfect smiles. It's a living promise, a daily practice of listening, forgiving, and loving with your whole heart, even when it aches. I am not the mother Ellie lost, nor am I the woman I used to be. But I am here with her and Michael, claiming this second chance, choosing healing and love, as imperfectly and honestly as I can. Who knows what storms will come or what joys await? For now, I am at peace and grateful. I have learned that the best happy endings are the ones we nurture every single day.